Before I start talking, I wanted to give a quick thanks to my co-speaker Debbie, who's fresh back from honeymoon, and it also happens to be her birthday today, so I wanted to just wish her a happy birthday. Anybody else want to wish her a happy birthday? Okay, so in my short talk, I want to explore how doing business sustainably helps small food enterprises gain commercial advantage. That's quite a mouthful, I realised, after I wrote that title. I'll begin by drawing on my own experiences of helping business to innovate, and by doing so, show how they can demonstrate their contribution to sustainable development. Then Debbie and I will conclude with a working example of how the RRU Community Food Co-ops are leading the way in defining, demonstrating and communicating their sustainability via an award-winning 10-point plan. Okay, the fact is that many food enterprises play a positive role in local communities and the environment. It's particularly, but not exclusively, the case for Indigenous businesses who tend to have an emotional bond where they're based. If food company owners are located in a certain region where the business is based, they are more likely to have a sort of tie and a bond to that place. But all too often, their efforts go unnoticed. Growth opportunities can be missed. And when I talk about growth opportunities, sort of maybe picking up on, in a practical sense, on some of the stuff Dave's just mentioned. Growth opportunities for the businesses themselves, but also growth opportunities for the local economy, the areas they're based in, because one can't happen without another. In other words, if the business grows, the economy grows with it. Back in 2009, when I last spoke here at the conference, it was alongside Jane Davison, the former AM for the Environment, Patrick Holden, the former Director of the Soil Association, and Roger Kerr, the former MD of Callum Wen. During that time, we heard about the new Welsh Government strategy for sustainable development. It's called One Planet Wales. That was launched in 2010. And we heard all about how that would form the central guiding principle for decision-making in Wales at a policy level, and then that trickle-down effect to sort of everybody else that affects. The Soil Association were planning to diversify from purely being an accreditation body for organic foods into an accreditation body for sustainable food. And Callum Wen were celebrating receiving a True Taste Award for their contribution to sustainable development that I was fortunate enough to be commissioned by the Welsh Government to judge at that time. So back then, point I'm making is back then all was quite rosy. And in some ways, we could be forgiven for thinking that sustainable development was a job done, and that food businesses would fall in line and seize the opportunity that sustainable development offered to them. And it hasn't quite worked out like that. In my view, one of the problems is that sustainable development was typically defined by the big issues and by the sort of doom and gloom mongers. So things like climate change, things like peak oil, things like energy and food shortages are brought to the table, rather than discussing the commercial opportunities that can be taken by businesses that take a conscientious approach towards the environment and towards their communities, and thereby can gain commercially. The slide on the screen there, as you hopefully might have read, it's just a quote I pulled out that shows a sort of growth in ethical consumerism between the years of 2010 and 2011. It's up virtually 8%, but it's a significant market. Much of my work over the last 5 years has involved helping organisations to consider the impacts they have on the environment and their community, and how, by doing this, they can take advantage of the growing demand for sustainable food. This slide on the screen contains actual quotes from a number of Welsh food businesses and they're talking about what sustainable development means to them. And I think this is interesting. I hope other people might share my view, because I think it's a fact that everybody will define sustainable development differently. So coming up with one single definition is very challenging, if not impossible. And in my view, it's better that sustainable development is seen as an umbrella term that encompasses all these definitions and more. When we ask businesses how they define sustainable development, I'll read some of them out. It's about getting the same product to market in a less destructive way. It's about well-being in people. It's about creating resilience. It's about the future. It's about constant improvement. It's about what we do. So there's lots of different definitions there. But if we classify sustainable development as all of these things and more, then it creates opportunities for small businesses, for small food enterprises to embrace sustainable practices. And done in the right way, they can then benefit commercially. So I've got a couple of quick examples. The first one is a company called Tanglois Dairy, based in Pyle near Bridgend. Some of you may know them. Tanglois is a dairy farm and a processor. They produce around about 1 million litres of milk per year, and they create bottled milk and cream. And I think we're having some of the cream at the lunch a little bit later on. They operate a local doorstep delivery via a fleet of milk vans, and they also sell through independent and multiples in their region. And the reason I talk about Tanglois Dairy quite a lot, the reason I talk about them is because they're one of the few remaining independent dairy farms in the UK that bottle and sell their own milk. So it's quite significant. And as a small business, as any small business needs to do, they need to innovate to survive. And some of the ways they're doing that are through embracing sustainability and sustainable practices. So they actively reduce food miles. Traditionally, at a dairy farm, a tanker would turn up every other day, collect their milk, take it over to the central processing unit, which for Tanglois happened to be up in Herefordshire. That would then be mixed in with all the other dairy farmers' milk from the region, put into bottles, and then shipped back to the local area to be sold through the multiples. So setting up this business model actively reduces those food miles. It also has a positive effect because it means the milk stays fresher for longer, so there's a longer shelf life. Retailers love that. They're very much into trading locally. They have a sort of what I would term a sort of growth within limits policy or strategy. So they set up to sell within 5 miles of the dairy farm, so that's their customer base. So it keeps it manageable, it keeps those quantities achievable, and it means they haven't got to exploit the animals, the environment, and everything else to kind of produce what they produce. They have a shared distribution operation whereby they deliver other companies' products in the local area, such as eggs, bread, and so on and so forth. And they're also involved in installing on-site renewables as we speak. So that's something that's happening right now. Second example is Parsons Pickles. I was going to throw in Patchwork Pate, by the way, but I know that Rufus, I don't think he's here at the moment, but I know that Rufus is coming along to speak to you guys a bit later on, so I thought I wouldn't want to steal his thunder. Parsons Pickles produce a range of seafood from Bury Port near Llanelli. They sell locally and across the UK through multiples. And they're recognised, and this is quite significant, they're recognised for their work in establishing the first marine conservation zone in the UK. I think it might be in Europe, but it's definitely in the UK. I'll have to check that, and I didn't have time to do that. It not only protects exploitation of workers that collect cockles from Bury Inlet, and if any of you can think back to 8 or 10 years ago when some Chinese workers were cockle picking off Morecambe Bay and the tide came in and washed half of them away, there's obviously a sort of strong ethic behind that. But it also prevents overfishing or overpicking of the cockle, so it means they can harvest, they can regrow. So fundamentally, it ensures that their business model is sustainable and they can stay in business because there's cockles for them to pick, for them to package, for them to pickle, and for them to sell on. So both of those two examples are innovative local businesses. And by communicating their sustainable credentials, they have, first of all, it's led to them winning awards. Second of all, it's led to them getting national recognition. But ultimately, it's enabled these companies to achieve growth. And I understand, Dave, about the issue with exponential growth and kind of the sort of downsides of that. But, you know, businesses in this scenario are set up to ultimately make money. So we need to kind of find that compromise and that balance somewhere. Okay. That's kind of enough for me for a moment. It's equally important, and I must stress, it's equally important for publicly funded organisation to be able to define, to be able to demonstrate, to be able to communicate their sustainable credentials. Whether that's for tendering for public sector contracts, whether it's for generating new income streams from the private sector and so on. And the community food co-ops are a leading example of that. And I wanted to pass over to Debbie, who's the manager of the community food co-ops in Wales, to explain a little bit more about what the food co-ops are, the benefits they bring, and why sustainability is important to them.
Hello, hi. I've only got 5 minutes, so it's going to be a whistle-stop tour of what we do and who we are. Some of you will know us. We've been actually running for 10 years now. We've been funded by the Welsh Government by 2 different departments for 10 years since 2004. So we've just had our 10-year celebration. We're actually an independent company, but funded by Welsh Government. The project was recognised, I guess, the system we were running, which was the food cooperative system, by the Welsh Government following a project that had run in Cumbria, and it had been running in Cumbria for a couple of years. The Welsh Government got hold of it and decided that it was something that they felt was really positive, that it hit lots of the agendas at the time, and also has expanded since then. So they decided to take it on, and we grew from there. Started with 2 years funding. I think we were tasked to open 26 co-ops and we opened 76. So obviously the demand was there at the time. And since then we've had kind of 2 years funding or years funding or year-on-year funding for the last 3 years. And we go till March 2015. We run the food co-op system, we run the same model in every area. Whether communities want to develop it differently themselves, that's completely up to them. We start with a very basic model, which is that it's with volunteers in a community venue, and we link them with local producers, suppliers, retailers, wholesalers, for them to access fresh fruits and veg. So it's basically a way of getting good, affordable, fresh fruit and veg and other products now as well into communities, but with a focus on areas of deprivation. There's lots of benefits to that. There's also, it doesn't work in every area, as Dave mentioned earlier, but there's lots of benefits to that. Not only kind of social benefits would be the obvious one, but there's also kind of economic and business benefits to that too. The model is a sustainable distribution model. It means that it can run without us and it can continue to run forever, indefinitely, as long as there are suppliers in place. Money changes hands, which is slightly different to food banks. So actually it's sustainable in that it's self-perpetuating for the suppliers that continue to supply the food courts themselves. In terms of finance, I think I had a quick look at some figures. 2012-13, there was about just over £400,000 generated. And last year that increased to almost £600,000 for Welsh businesses. So there's obviously kind of economic benefits to businesses too. It's an accessible marketplace. It's really easy for suppliers to get involved. We're pretty much working on trust. So we hope that they will supply good quality, fresh, affordable food. And in return for that, they get cash. It's easy. There's obviously kind of social and community benefits to that too. It kind of empowers communities and individuals and upskills them, gets them back into learning how to do business, I guess. There's obviously the health agenda and there's also the food poverty agenda, which obviously Dave touched on too. So it links into all of those things for volunteers. There's many environmental benefits, and I guess it's only really in the last few years that we've started to recognise those with help from Ecostudio. And I guess some of those are less packaging because the food is delivered in bulk. We use bags for life, so it's actually reducing waste as well because food is ordered in advance. So they only ever get enough food for which they've paid for. There's reduced food miles, obviously, because we're using local suppliers for local food co-ops. And I guess one of the salient things that we do is that we hope that we encourage local growing because there's a ready market there, because growers and producers are already in place. Hopefully they'll know their market for the following year, so they'll be able to then put in the ground what they need for the following year. So there's real benefits to that. One of the figures that is always bandied about is that only 5% of fruit and veg consumed in Wales is Welsh. Well, the food co-ops are actually doing, depending on the time of year, anywhere between 36 and 49% of Welsh food. So there's a really, really positive benefit to working with local suppliers. So in terms of operating sustainably, and also kind of linking into, I don't know if our 10-point plan is up, we really believe that it's important that we not only operate sustainably, but we demonstrate how we do that, because if we don't, we've got no way of improving. So we did some work with Ecostudio. I'm not going to, you can read that yourselves. This is what we're working to. The hope is that beyond 2015 we'll be able to roll this out across the whole of Wales. So it gives you an idea about the kind of work we've been doing.
Thanks, Debbie.
Okay.
I think that provides a really good case study. I mean, just sort of, I suppose, to sort of put that into my words for the purposes of the talk, we were able to sort of work together. It's not my work, it's our work. Debbie's had the vision, the leadership to bring a team together to develop this 10-point plan for the food co-ops. It forms a robust methodology that they can use to communicate their achievements, both now and to future sort of funding partners. And like Debbie's mentioned there, it's sort of, at the moment, it's useful for them to inform their forward development strategy. I'm not going to sort of go into great reams of detail about that because I don't think it's appropriate at the moment, but basically the three areas that Debbie's mentioned, we're looking at which form the basis of a sustainability plan. Environmental indicators, it's just about doing more with less. Economic indicators, in this case about generating resilience in the Welsh food supply chain. Social indicators, it's about building capacity and well-being. Our details are on the screen there. I mean, in conclusion, small food enterprises can take advantage of growing opportunities in sustainable food. I mentioned it's up 8 billion year on year. That's a significant growth. Large buyers, as in the multiples and so on, have these things called corporate social responsibility plans in place, which means if suppliers can conform to those standards, it's going to break down barriers in terms of supplying into those marketplaces. And also legislation is kicking in. If you look at the issue of public procurement at the moment, certainly there's talk and there's activity going in terms of making sustainability part of the legislative structure in Wales and across the border. So businesses that comply to sustainability will be more likely to be able to supply into those marketplaces. Many companies doing this well already. Many more can follow on. And it's important because it creates growth opportunities. And I echo what Dave says earlier on about I think growth within limits is a good, strong way to benefit local economies. And being sustainable requires vision and innovation. Thanks very much for listening. Thanks for inviting me along to talk. Contact details on the screen. I'll be around for lunch if you want to chat to me about anything. Debbie's unfortunately got to leave. Thank you.